Hey everyone, Brendan Snyder here. How are you? Thanks so much for joining me and welcome to a special video where I try and discern, is Pink Floyd's Dark Side of the Moon really all that? So released back on March 1st of 1973, we're right about to have the 52nd anniversary of that here. So I thought it'd be a good time to take a look back at this album. I myself have 9 different versions of this album, suggesting that it might be as great as they say, but I'm not so sure. I'm going to try and break this down and discern and figure out whether or not it's really all that, or is it just a bunch of hype? So join me for that. We're going to get into it here in just a bit. But before we start, if you're new to my channel and you haven't already hit the subscribe button, please do. Also leave a comment, hit like, all those things do help support my channel. I'd greatly appreciate it. And of course, as an added bonus, if you turn on notifications, you'll never miss an episode and stay up to date on cool episodes just like this, where I'm trying to decide whether or not Pink Floyd's Dark Side of the Moon is all that. So let's find out. All right, now first and foremost, I have to state up front, I am a huge Pink Floyd fan. Obviously, that's why I've got 9 versions of this album. I came into the band in around 92, 93, sort of officially during the initial 20th anniversary of this great album, Dark Side of the Moon. But growing up, I certainly remember 1987 and the reformation for the Momentary Lapse of Reason tour and ongoing ever since then. But as I look back at this and I try and really discern what it is about Dark Side of the Moon, that's where we're going to be going with things. And if you happen to like this shirt, because I'm really digging this myself, I just got it. First time I'm getting to wear it here. To film the video, I thought let's make a Pink Floyd Dark Side of the Moon themed video so that I can wear and show off the shirt. But if you do like this shirt, I got it from SocieTees, the online t-shirt company. They do a lot of great artists, not just Pink Floyd, but a lot of cool stuff. So head over there after the video and you can check out this great shirt if you want to help celebrate the 52nd anniversary, as it would be at this point, for the album. But of course, like I said, lots of other great stuff as well. All right, so Dark Side of the Moon. This is what we're here to talk about. It's their 8th studio album. It's got a runtime of 42 minutes, 50 seconds, produced by the band, but mixed by the amazing Alan Parsons. It's really where he came to fame on this. We'll talk more about that mix and style a little bit later. Claim to fame on this album is that it has spent longer on the Billboard album charts than any other album in history. It currently sits at 990 weeks, almost 1,000 weeks that this thing has spent on the charts. The next one down is hundreds of weeks below it, so no real sign of another band, another album catching up to it. You know, again, suggesting that this thing is as great as it is. It has sold 15 million copies here in the US and estimated 45 million around the world. Big, huge standout songs that we all know that you hear on classic rock radio and everywhere. The song Money, Time, Us and Them, and the crowd-pleasing showstopper, Great Gig in the Sky. Consistently ranked on top album reviews, ranking charts, just all those things, year-end countdowns, best albums of the 70s, etc., in top spots. Again, all suggesting that this album might be all that, but that's what I'm here to discern, at least for myself and hopefully for you guys tuning in and watching. So in my opinion though, and I've always felt this isn't something I've come to feel about it, but I've often felt that this album here is both overplayed and over-marketed. Perhaps more than any other album by the band, with the exception of maybe The Wall from '79. That one certainly as well. If you hear people talk about Floyd, they're always going to mention Dark Side of the Moon and The Wall. But I think that 9 times out of 10, you're going to hear Dark Side of the Moon as the first thing anyone mentions. It's tied in not only musically, but also just in social commentary, media, pop culture, whatever you want to call it. You have the thing where if you play it and you time it just right with the Wizard of Oz, you know, how all that comes together and plays. And there's a lot of things like that that take the album above and beyond just it musically. And all those things, I think, help in setting it up for more and making it bigger than it would feel if it was just a kind of standalone album on its own. Um, as I said, I've got 9 versions of this, 2 different LP editions of this. So I've got those original 1973 Harvest editions. As I said, I came into the band in 1992 because I picked up the 20th anniversary of it, this little box set edition of the album. Then being in the band already by that point and Division Bell coming out, the band goes on tour and performs it in its entirety and records it and releases it as part of Pulse. So the second disc in here is a live rendition of that album. Ultimately, the remastered edition of the album, I did have a regular standalone one at one time, got rid of it, so I don't count it here, but I did have 10 copies at one time. The immersion box set edition of it, which is absolutely fantastic in terms of cool, rare material and stuff that you can get through this that's surrounding all of it, and I think makes for a much better listening experience overall to the album, especially for those of us that feel that the album itself is overplayed and worn out. One of the things being in that immersion box set is an early mix by Alan Parsons that I actually think is superior, but it may just be the fact that I feel that the album itself is overplayed and worn out. I've heard it more times than I can count or want to remember, I guess, at this point. The live 1974 concert edition that's also included in the immersion box set, but this was a standalone release that came out in 2023. And then, if that's not enough, Roger Waters just did his own version redo, where he interpreted the entire album completely new and different, and it's much more of a slowed down Leonard Cohen style sort of folk version of the album than if it had been, the original 1973 version. But it came out in 2023 in an interesting way to put a 50-year spin on such an amazing album that is Dark Side of the Moon. Now, the thing with it, though, with all those different versions are that, again, it is interesting to hear some of those different takes on things, but it floods the market and it just puts it out there all the time in everyone's face. And for me, at least, it's always got me questioning whether or not the album itself is really as great as one would think that it is. And certainly, if we think about the time in the era of 1973 and what was going on and what bands were out around that time, and the jump from Obscure by Clouds, the album before, to what it was at that time. And in 1973, the production level on this album, what Alan Parsons was able to do, both in the production aspect, but the mixing aspect of it, the layering, the sequencing, the mastering of all of that sort of stuff, that everyone playing their part on the album, brought this to a level that hadn't been seen in 1973. And so, like a lot of art, when you look back at things, those of you that know the artist Jackson Pollock, the splatter paint guy, right? We all know that we could do that today, but at the time that he did it, no one had done it. It was a new thing. Same thing with artists like Rothko, the guy that does the solid color, one color paint on a canvas, calling it art. But it was more about the concept, the idea, and the time frame for which it happened. And oftentimes music is the same way. The first time somebody does something, it is an iconic thing. And I think that production level of what the album is, still to this day, one of the best produced albums or mixed albums that ever came out, which is why it gets talked about the way that it does. I do feel there is some filler content on the album. It's minor, but the song On the Run. There's an early mix version of this that Alan Parsons did that is longer, that I think is far more enjoyable and really ties better to the album overall. It was oftentimes played live in concert to that version of it because they had more time, but edited down for the sake of the LP at the time. So there's a little bit of that on here. Most of the stuff, though, well worth exploring on the album. But there's also overrated content in my opinion. And I talked about it up front, and I said, called this, the showstopper piece that the crowd always goes wild for in concert. And it is true. But I personally think The Great Gig in the Sky is a completely overrated song that I often skip. I do not care for it. The improvised vocals that are on it, the gospel style singing does not gel with me at all. It never has. I've never liked it. I haven't warmed up to it. I highly respect it for the vocal abilities, and in concert when somebody can perform and do that, it is that kind of showstopper because it's like somebody soloing on an instrument. But for what it is, and again, this goes back to the earlier mix done by Alan Parsons prior to the vocalist coming in and improvising her vocal parts on it. There is a version of Great Gig in the Sky without it, and I think it is hands down far superior, and I would much prefer that. So oftentimes today, I am listening to that earlier Alan Parsons mix and not the final version of this album. I think it just excels in a number of areas, making some of the things that I think bring down the overall album, make them much better. And again, that could be the sense that the album itself is overly worn out for me. And so hearing this alternate version of it still holds some extra life in it for me. The overall album as a whole, let's talk a bit about that on here. I feel as though, in comparison, I'm certainly, comparing it to other Pink Floyd albums from throughout their career, I do feel that this one here is a bit mellow. And while good at certain times, it's just not good for every occasion. This is not an album I'm going to play in the car while driving. It is an early morning, late at night style album for me. There's other ones that I want to hear more. This is also one that I didn't find overly exciting to hear done live in concert when it was done on the Pulse tour. There's some real strong rockin' songs like Time and Money on here, but they almost seem out of place for me in terms of the rest of the album. They sort of break that flow of the more atmospheric, mellow side of things that I think, had the album been done all in that style, would have been a bit better for my taste at least. The thing is, as I said, 1973, you got to remember the time frame and the year and what kind of a groundbreaking sound and style and statement the band was making with this album. And I think that is part of the reason that it has held up as long as it has, being the artistic statement that is Dark Side of the Moon for this thing here. It was a game changer at that time in production, mixing, and I think that in and of itself warrants the aspect that a lot of people attribute to this album being as good as it is. But looking back on this album after 50 years, is Dark Side of the Moon really all that? I say no. I don't think that it is. And again, remember, I am a diehard Pink Floyd fan, but I'm looking back at this, I'm saying I understand its context and its time frame, and if it's that, then I understand why it hit the way that it did. When we look back at it 50 years on, is it still all of that? And I don't think that it is, just for the big reasons that I have outlined above. The band itself, I think, has done far more interesting material since this time. This, as I said, has some of that filler on it with On the Run, a skippable track, for me at least, Great Gig in the Sky, and I know I'm not alone in that. I've heard from a bunch of you guys out there that feel the same way about it. I don't think that the style is overly consistent throughout. Definitely overplayed. It's overpraised as well, and I get a little bit tired of that. It makes it hard to dig into this album when all you hear is how great the thing is. The album itself, related today, or I should say released today, I don't think would carry the same weight and fare as well as it did in 1973. I think part of the way that the reaction was at the time is why it gets the high marks that it does today. The fact that it has spent nearly 1,000 weeks on the Billboard chart, I think, is the other reason that this album continues to fare as well as it does today. It's one of those things that people hear that, see that, and say, gee, I should check out Pink Floyd. What album am I going to check out? Well, I got to start with Dark Side of the Moon. I mean, if it has spent over 990 weeks on the charts, there must be something good about it. And that's what keeps this thing going. And therefore, it just continues to sell and grow in stature every year. But with that, the overhyped nature of it, that is like a steamrolling thing that just continues, keeping the album constantly ranked and constantly having new fans join in to check out. Why is it constantly appearing in those charts? Why is it constantly on the Billboard Hot 100? That's where I see this thing being and why it is where it is, not necessarily because the music itself is all that. I think, as I said, better albums exist by the band. Wish You Were Here in 1975, the follow-up album to Dark Side of the Moon from 73. In fact, Wish You Were Here having a 50th anniversary this year. So happy anniversary to the album itself. Maybe we'll do a video on that one. But Animals in 77, which is my favorite of the Pink Floyd albums. And if you compare Animals to Dark Side of the Moon, I think you would understand why I feel the way that I do about Dark Side of the Moon. Animals was the 10th studio album, follow-up to Wish You Were Here. It built on everything that was both Dark Side of the Moon and Wish You Were Here, but they were exploring the long-form song at that point, even to a greater degree that they had already started on Wish You Were Here, but a veritable combination and culmination of everything that was Floyd on that album. And I just see that as being really where people should start with the band, as opposed to something like Dark Side of the Moon. But another overrated album, The Wall from 79, their 11th studio album, double album. I know that album is huge and up there. It's got the movie. It's been performed live. I don't find that album also to be as great as everyone says that it is, but that is a whole other story and something else to spend another video on at another time. So in closing, for now, while we celebrate Dark Side of the Moon's 52nd anniversary, being released on March 1st of 2020, well, March 1st of 1973, but the 52nd anniversary in 2025 here, in my opinion, it's overrated, overplayed, overmarketed, and in my opinion, Dark Side of the Moon is not all that. Still a great album. I'm still a Pink Floyd fan. I still love it, but it's not all that. All right, so bring on those crazy responses now. I'm sure that a ton of you guys feel otherwise, and that's totally okay. Just remember, this is my opinion. It is not fact. Everyone's entitled to their opinion here. Certainly, we can all agree that we love the music of Pink Floyd. And don't forget to head on over to SocieTees, where you can check out this great Pink Floyd Dark Side of the Moon shirt and a whole host of other things by Pink Floyd that they do, as well as a lot of other great artists on their online website. All right, everyone, take care, have a good one, and I'll talk to you real soon. Bye-bye.